Owl-eyed and terrified, Warren Snyder occupied an armchair in his living room. He sat stiff, erect, his hands upturned in his lap. Now and then his right hand shook, his mouth hung slightly open, and his lower lip trembled almost continuously. On his left temple a silvery bead gleamed. As rounded and as polished as the head of a decorative upholstery tack, it looked like a misplaced earring. The bead was in fact packed with electronics, nanocircuitry, and was rather like the head of a nail in that it was the visible portion of a needle-thin probe that had been fired into his brain by a pistol-like device. Instantaneous chemical cauterization of flesh and bone prevented bleeding. Warren said nothing. He had been ordered to remain silent, and he had lost the power to disobey. Except for his twitching fingers and the tremors, which were both involuntary, he did not move, not even to change position in the chair, because he had been told to be still. His gaze shifted back and forth between 2 points of interest. His wives. With a silver bead on her left temple and her eyes glazed like those of an amped-out meth junkie, Judy Snyder perched on the sofa, knees together, hands folded serenely in her lap. She didn't twitch or tremble like her husband. She seemed to be without fear, perhaps because the probe had damaged her brain in ways not intended. The other Judy stood by one of the living-room windows that faced the street, alternately studying the snowy night and regarding her 2 prisoners with contempt. Their kind were the spoilers of the earth. Soon these 2 would be led away like a couple of sheep to be rendered and processed. And one day, when the last human beings were eradicated, the world would be as much of a paradise as it had ever been or ever could be. This Judy was not a clone of the one on the sofa, nothing as disgusting as a mere meat machine, which was all that human beings were. She had been designed to pass for the original Judy, but the illusion would not hold up if her internal structure and the nature of her flesh were to be studied by physicians. She had been created in a couple of months, programmed and extruded, born as an adult in the hive, deep underground, with no Tao other than her program, with no illusion that she possessed free will, with no obligation whatsoever to any higher power other than Victor Laban, whose true last name was Frankenstein, and with no life after this one to which she needed to aspire. Through the parted draperies she watched a tall man crossing the snow-mantled street, hands in his coat pockets, face turned to the sky as if delighting in the weather. He approached the house on the front walkway, playfully kicking up little clouds of snow. Judy couldn't see his face, but she assumed he must be Andrew Snyder, the 19-year-old son of the family. His parents expected him to return home from work about this time. She let the draperies fall into place and stepped out of the living room into the foyer. When she heard Andrew's footsteps on the porch, she opened the door. "Andy," she said, "I was so worried." Chucking off his boots to leave them on the porch, Andrew smiled and shook his head. "You worry too much, Mom. I'm not late." "No, you're not, but terrible things have been happening in town tonight." "What terrible things?" As Andrew stepped into the foyer in his stocking feet, the Judy replicant closed the door, turned to him, and began to unbutton his pea-coat. In the best imitation of motherly concern that she could manage, she said, "You'll catch your death in this weather." Pulling a scarf from around his neck, he asked again, "What terrible things?" He frowned with confusion and annoyance, as if her fussing with his coat must be out of character for her. As she opened the buttons, she maneuvered him until the doorway to the study lay beyond even his peripheral vision.